Joining us now is Amanda Iovino, WPA Intelligence, polling data analytics firm out of Washington, D.C. We do this every other week. Amanda gives us updates, and we had a slide on Kamala Harris, and I thought it was interesting and telling. The first slide you open up with here is why Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris. I think it jumps right off the page, but with also a potential downside for Joe Biden. Let's jump into that, Amanda, and we'll go through the rest of the slides on COVID demographics, which are very interesting, as well as back to school polling.
Yeah, so now this was done by Morning Consult. Obviously, there's not polling. There are no real numbers here before within the last, 14 hours since she was officially picked. But Morning Consult had done this survey in the end of July, looking at what Democrats wanted out of Joe Biden's VP pick. And the first thing that they wanted was someone with legislative experience. 79% of Democrats wanted someone with leg experience. 70% wanted executive experience. Then they wanted someone who was younger than him. What I thought was interesting was that 38% of Democrats and 40% of Blacks wanted a VP nominee with experience in law enforcement, especially given everything that's gone on. I thought that was an interesting data point here. Democrats overall wanted someone who's a person of color and someone who's a little bit more liberal than Biden. And all of these pieces, sorry.
Let's make sure we stay on this slide here a good bit. Let's look at independents and where they lined up with this thing. They seem to track similarly on the questions. Less interested in being more liberal or a person of color. Experience matters and law enforcement matters. Younger obviously matters to independents, but executive experience, which she doesn't really have. I mean, she was AG of California, but governing experience and legislative experience, I think she has. And I think that's the box that Biden checked, isn't it?
It is. And I do think we can kind of check the executive experience box with the AG as much as any of the other kind of top picks would have had. She's pretty much, with the exception of Gretchen Whitmer, who's been governor of Michigan for, a couple of months now. Kamala's AG experience probably is the most executive branch experience that any of these other choices had.
That was the obvious one, but really the other graph you have on the right-hand side here is, I think, determinative of why the pick was also selected. She had very strong name ID, but she also has very high negatives. She's underwater, like most of them are, on fave, unfave, which is very telling.
It is, and I think it's a factor that she's just actually well known among the overall electorate. I went back and looked at the August of 2016 polls, and before the conventions, Tim Kaine had 24% faves, and Mike Pence had 18% faves among voters nationwide. After the convention, they were closer to where Kamala is now. Kaine had 33% fave, and Pence had 36% fave post-convention. Now, without really having a convention in kind of our typical sense this time around, I think Kamala's 33% favorables is actually pretty close to what prior VP picks have seen. Now, the unfavorables are there. I would bet, I don't see crosstabs on these, but I would bet a lot of those come from Republicans who just know her, have heard her through the campaign. She was very visible, and that's probably what's driving a lot of those unfavorables. So they were eventually not going to like her anyway.
Right. This is the divided electorate that we see. Obviously, Elizabeth Warren had much higher unfavorables, but I think what you're going to see, obviously, is an attempt to frame her in an unfavorable light. That's what the Republicans do. That's what political parties do. That's what campaigns do. They try to create the binary, they're worse than we are, never mind how bad we are, narrative. And Kamala Harris is going to have enough of that. But I think one of the critical parts here relative, because you brought up Tim Kaine, early on when Tim Kaine was selected in 2016, a lot of people were saying, oh, Tim's a great pick. He's really smart. He's a great attorney. He'll be a great attack dog. And I thought to myself instinctively, Tim Kaine's not an attack dog. He was a defense attorney. Mm-hmm. Kamala Harris, however, is a prosecutor, and she is going to prosecute the case against Donald Trump.
Yep. It's going to be interesting to see. She was a very good campaigner. She brought a lot of energy to her campaign events. I think it'll be interesting to see if that kind of pushes back against this Sleepy Joe comment. But like I said, I do think that she'll bring some energy to the ticket.
Yeah, I think,
but she is much more liberal than Joe Biden is, which can be used, especially on Medicare for All.
She's not Medicare for All. Medicare for All is being able to opt into Medicare. What she proposed was eliminating private health insurance, which means I couldn't contract with anyone for my own family's health insurance. And that's going to be a thing. I just saw in the Wall Street Journal that Trump apparently is going to announce his health care plan only 3+ years in. But, Kamala Harris, I think, is what I've seen, and my reflection on her is she comes across very well initially. And I think what I perceive as a lack of authenticity and an ability to deliver something more than the initial bite at the apple, if you will, for Kamala. I just don't know if there's a lot there, but in the short time that we have, I don't think it matters, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think that's often a problem that women candidates, especially for executive positions, have. It's just that there's no
big win for her. What has she really done? You can look at the governors, Whitmer. Warren has gotten some things done. She can point to accomplishments. So that's, Gina Raimondo just is not well known in Rhode Island. Was a pretty good governor of Rhode Island. Has done some really good things, especially in the pension reform. You could point to that. With Kamala Harris, her victories are basically in the prosecutorial office when she was prosecuting crimes in San Francisco.
That, and they'll point to her push against Kavanaugh as a way to energize some of the more liberal base also. And back to your attack dog point.
I don't know if they're going to push that, because you also have the boomerang effect there of antagonizing Catholic votes, especially in the Midwest and Upper Midwest, which is a dominant part of that electorate out there.
Well, that's when good campaign targeting comes into play.
You know any firms like that? Just kidding.
I do, not really for the Dem side, but
that's what WPA Intel does for those of you playing at home on the board version. So this poll was morning consult, end of July. Overnight numbers from Vegas showed a little trend towards Trump, which I thought was interesting. But it's early. We'll see. These are fun to digest. What I thought was interesting also is how less known Susan Rice was.
Mm-hmm.
Never heard of 37%. That just shows how much of a DC insider she was inside the Obama bubble. But also, what I found interesting is when you need, if you can make the national security play, if there is one single term Biden, I don't even know if he serves that term out and invoke the 25th Amendment at some point, just because of his cognitive decline, is, the question of the Durham report and the liability that Susan Rice could have portended for Biden-Rice ticket. If she's indicted, that would have been awful. So I think I think Kamala Harris was a safe pick. I think she's great on television. She'll bring out crowds, but they can't have crowds. They'll get people online and watching social media. So
it'll be fun to watch Maya Rudolph for them. SNL.
Maya Rudolph just got a big raise, didn't she? She's the comedian on Saturday Night Live who portrays her. And the great thing is for Democrats, they take Kate McKinnon off the stage because she is absolutely brutal in portraying female candidates, regardless of the party. I think she's one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. Her portrayal of her was just brutal.
Wow.
Brutal.
There was also a very nice post on Instagram yesterday of Sarah Palin giving advice to Kamala. So
that's awesome.
When the women candidates kind of come together and at least share some of the rough points of running with each other and kind of commiserate. So.
Well, Sarah Palin might have given the advice. Make sure you're prepared.
All right, so should we dive into some of the coronavirus?
Let's go to coronavirus. Let's see if you have any questions from the participants online. If you have any questions, shoot them over, leave them in the chat box. We'll try to get them to you. We're just dotting the numbers just like you are. So if you have a question, leave it in the chat box. Otherwise, we're going to go to coronavirus.
Yep. So I think the last time we looked at this was about a month ago. This is the national concerns and how concerned people are about the coronavirus outbreak in their local area. And it's been relatively stable. The last kind of inflection point that we saw was kind of in the middle of June when cases started to surge in the South. But we've got about 60% who are either extremely or moderately concerned, and only about 39% who are not very concerned at all.
Okay, nothing's really changed. Well, let's go back.
Sorry.
A little down on the extremely concerned. Is there an inflection point there that we're not seeing?
It's a little too early to tell.
Okay.
We'll kind of see, because you can see there are kind of dips and increases as we go through. It does look to be a very, very slight peak or increase with the not concerned or a little concerned, but we'll kind of see how that goes.
Okay, let's pay attention to that one, because there's like the beginning of an uptick and a downtick there on the concerns, extreme and little. All right.
So what kind of might be driving this kind of steady high concern? Axios had a poll out recently of, do people know someone who has personally had COVID or died from COVID? So we've got 50% of Americans know someone who has tested positive for the coronavirus, and half of those 50%, so we're talking about roughly 25% of Americans overall, say that this person lives in their same local community. And 21% of Americans know someone who has died from the coronavirus, and 42% of that 21%, so we're talking about 9% of Americans overall, say that they have a family member or close friend who has died from the coronavirus. So you can see a steady increase of people who have known someone who has tested positive, and a unfortunately slow but fairly steady number of people who have know someone who has died from the coronavirus.
As the testing has increased significantly, you're going to have more diagnoses. Still, a level of asymptomatic infections is there, but the people who have been affected by this, those who have died from it, those who know people who died from it, those whose family members, etc. I mean, it's impactful. It's part of our conscious right now, and will be that way for some time. The market is so reactive to news of a vaccine. I saw a movement in early morning trading in markets where people were hoping or reacting to the news that Russia thinks it has a vaccine. And of course, if you believe Russia has a vaccine, I've got a Russian vaccine to sell you.
I think we talked about previously, kind of a hesitation of people to take the virus or to take a vaccine to the virus right away. And this is one where I would personally probably be in that, like, I'm going to wait and see how this.
Who would want to take a Russian vaccine right now? Anybody?
I'm not sure.
That's like flying on a Ukrainian jet over Russia. It's just not going to happen.
So let's look at Virginia specifically. How concerned are you about an outbreak? We still see kind of a slow and steady kind of number. Back a month ago, these numbers are fairly stable. We had 31% extremely concerned, 30% moderately concerned. So we're still talking about 61% in those top two buckets. So it's been fairly stable in Virginia. And again, the inflection point here was a little bit before cases started surging in the South.
I think what we want to do next time is probably get the graph on this one a little bit more descriptive and take out the top ends of this thing so we can see some of those inflection points. Because it looks like if you're looking at this online, you're kind of like, oh, it's not really going anywhere. But there's a big difference between 61 earlier and where it was back in, in the April numbers when it peaked.
Yeah.
But this is, if we can't show that a little bit more intensely, I think you can see that obviously it's calmed down since the first wave of this pandemic and becoming more of our dailiness. I'm always looking for the inflection points. Go ahead.
Yep. So again, we'll kind of see there might be a very slight dip here, kind of in the middle of August, but we'll see how that goes, and especially kind of once we get into the fall.
It's basically 64.
Yeah. Once we get closer to flu season, we'll see how these numbers change.
Right, and we'll see how many people are getting their flu shots. I mean, our neighbors have already been reserved. Their pharmacies are already calling them and reserving them times to get their flu shots.
Oh, wow. I did want to point this out because we're going to talk about.
This is a great slide. This is a great slide.
So this is where it currently stands. I didn't put trend data on this, but white and it's Virginians, only 24% say that they're extremely concerned about a local outbreak, whereas we have 63% of African Americans and 42% of Hispanics are extremely concerned about their area. Now, I think there are a lot of different factors that kind of come into this. Obviously, African American and Hispanic communities have gotten hit harder by the virus. They're more likely to catch it and more likely to die of corona than white populations. There's just population density factors to consider. They're more.
This is social distancing 101 right here. I mean, white rural America doesn't see this as much of a threat as urban populations or inner suburb populations who have seen the impact and who have more comorbidities than have been experienced in rural America. Although the recent outbreaks in rural America might be reflective of that 28%, which is higher.
So that might impact it. Also, African Americans and Hispanics are more likely to be in the jobs that have had to have the essential jobs. So there's a lot of different factors here, but just keep it.
That's 86 and 75, which if you break that down in the previous slide, you see where the concern is, right?
Absolutely. And the other one that I wanted to show, because again, we're going to talk about this when it comes to schools, is the differences by gender. We've got 27% of men saying they're extremely concerned. You got 55% total in kind of the top two boxes, whereas 38% of women say they're very concerned. And 66% overall saying that they are either extremely or moderately concerned about a coronavirus outbreak.
Always fascinating to see how men are concerned about health.
So
relative to women, I mean, men are concerned by health. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but relative to women, I see it differently.
Go into that. So this is from a Kaiser Family Foundation survey, and we've got a bunch of these. Now, this isn't Virginia specific, this is nationwide, but the Kaiser Family Foundation has done a lot of healthcare related survey work over the last, over a very long time. They did a lot of in-depth research on Obamacare and Medicare for All, and they just kind of keep monthly tracking polls about the top health issues of the day. So a lot of times we'll talk about how to read polling and whether the question is worded in a biased manner. And I wanted to focus here on this question. They asked, which comes closer to you? Is it better to open schools sooner so parents can work and students won't miss out on learning and other services schools provide, even if there is some risk of students, teachers, and staff getting coronavirus? Versus, is it better to open schools later to ensure the risk of getting coronavirus is as low as possible, even if it means some students will fall behind academically, miss out on services that school provide, and some parents will not be able to return to work? And this is probably as fair of a question as you're gonna get. I think it lays out both the positive and the negative of each option.
Yeah, because when you said bias, I was looking for the bias in the question. I was like, man, I don't see any bias in that one. That's a pretty good question. I'm glad you brought home that final point.
So overall,
it also shows how polarized our electorate is, even on a non-biased question revolving around risk of health of students and parents and teachers.
Yep. So 63% of Americans overall want to wait to open schools, but we've got 60% of Republicans who say open it sooner, and 87% of Democrats say wait.
The independents here are the big one, right?
Yep, that's the one you always kind of look to see which way are they leaning. Are they closer to Democrats or are they closer to Republicans? And here they are closer to Democrats. Now looking at parents specifically, so who's going to be most impacted by all of this? 60% of parents want to wait and open schools later. And the racial difference that we saw in the last couple of slides, parents of color want to wait. 76% say let's keep the risk of catching coronavirus as low as possible. White parents, it's 51 say wait, 41% say open schools now.
Fascinating. Okay.
Looking at it by gender, we've got 67% of mothers say wait, and 51% of fathers say wait.
At what point does the Trump administration go, you know what, I think we're going to postpone for a month and see how it goes for schools, right? I mean, at some point, he's going to have to recognize these numbers and say, yeah, we should probably wait a month or two.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that there was actually a Virginia survey that came out recently and didn't go into all of the crosstown, so I couldn't put it up on a slide, but it showed that parents in Virginia overwhelmingly wanted to wait and have their local school boards and local officials decide whether or not to open schools. And that was true for parents with K through 12, kids in K through 12. It was interesting as parents of college age students wanted the CDC guidelines to be the deciding factor and not the localities where the colleges are. So I thought that was an interesting break, but I could definitely see the administration saying, okay, let's let this be a local issue and not necessarily a federal one.
What I've seen in the higher education, just because we have 2 kids going back here in a couple of weeks, they're bubbling the kids and they're doing online, but at school, same prices, of course, but the universities that have, frankly, the finances to withstand not having folks on campus, because room and board is a significant part of their income. You know, they're just charging for tuition, not having kids on campus, and those are the ones who can frankly afford it. So you see a lot of economic impact on decision making here. You even saw that with the Big Ten and Pac-12 canceling their sports seasons for the fall. So a lot of factors here that go into decision making.
No. So what I thought was interesting was that
I think we didn't talk about one of those slides. Total parents with a child who normally attends school. So these are all
age 5 to 17, non-homeschooling.
Okay. So these are okay.
And this covers whether they're in public, private, or charter schools.
I would wonder what people with kids outside of schools think about this.
Yeah.
What's their view? Like if because they vote too, right? They're going to make up their minds on this, or at least have an opinion. I don't know if this is going to be an issue where people determine their votes if they change votes. I mean, obviously the independents in this survey are, I think, a pretty glaring problem for Republicans and an opportunity for Democrats. But the question always is, do you care or do you vote this way? Do you have an opinion or do you care? And if you care enough to vote based on that? And I don't know if we're in any of that. I don't know what's going to affect the final 10% of the voters in America.
Yeah, I think we'll get to this in a minute, but I think showing a little bit of empathy for each side, especially with independents, is really what goes a long way. And Republicans need to show a little bit of, well, it's not just all about the economics. Like we have to have some of the,
economics, but it is about, empathy, like you say, and I think that's why you're going to see some more schools going to a hybrid approach. If you want to send your kid to school, you can. If you don't want to send your kid to the school, you can. But also, we're going to see just how robust these virtual platforms are. I don't think they're very robust for public schools. They're just not. There's some good ones out there. K-12 and Connections Academy in particular have been around for 15, 20 years, and they have excellent systems, excellent platforms for educating kids, but most public schools just frankly don't. And that's going to be a quality issue going forward.
So what's interesting is that mothers also report having higher levels of stress and adverse health effects due to the coronavirus than fathers do. So just wanted to put all of this in kind of perspective. So even though women are saying, or mothers are saying, we should wait to send our kids back to school, they are feeling a lot more stress from the pandemic than fathers are. And of course, this is self-reported, so there is a lot of asterisks to put into all of this data. But we've got 69% of mothers who reported feeling some sort of adverse health effect versus 51% of fathers. And the main focus here is that mothers are saying that they're having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or they're sleeping too much, and that their diet is being affected.
Yeah, so even if you're not infected by the virus, you're affected by the virus.
And so kind of mentioned this the last time, and I wanted to pull the numbers. The part of that stress is probably coming from what mothers are reporting is spending more time homeschooling their children, being responsible for childcare and the housework going on. And this is a Morning Consult poll. This is back from April. So this is from when people were doing much more of the homeschooling, or at least attempting to at the end of the last school year. So 80% of women said that they were doing the bulk of the homeschooling work, whereas only 3% said that their husbands were, or their partners were. Men, 45% reported that they were doing the bulk of the homeschooling. And it was a similar kind of disparity here for who's most responsible for childcare, especially for couples with children under 12 and couples working, both working full-time and remotely. 64% of women said they're still more responsible for childcare, and only 3% reported that their spouse was. So once children start going back to school, even if it's the hybrid approach and they're staying at home, women are still going to feel a lot of this stress for dealing with homeschooling, dealing with childcare for the days when they're home, and still handling most of the housework, including cooking and cleaning. Now, I bring this up just to talk about it with the political ramifications. I work a lot with clients, especially Republican male clients, and I'm advising them at this point to show empathy on this, like I was saying before. A little bit of acknowledgement that women especially are feeling a lot of the stress of this pandemic. Like you said, kind of they're being affected by the pandemic, whether or not they have actually caught COVID. But we need to, as candidates, talk about, acknowledge the stress. Even if there's not a clear way out, they have to say, like, I hear you, I'm listening.
That's a very important part of politics, is being heard. I mean, people don't necessarily, they would love to have all their problems solved, but more importantly, they want to know that their concerns are being heard, so someone might address it. And that's all you can ask, is like, just understand what I'm going through. And that helps reduce stress, that they're understood.
Yep.
It's a big one. And, frankly, Republican men don't do that well.
We're working on it.
They don't. No, good luck with
that. Okay, so here, what are the main concerns that parents have about reopening schools? And what was interesting is that there's actually a slight advantage, or slightly more concern about teachers and other staff at the school getting sick from corona, as opposed to the children actually being unable or unwilling to comply with distancing practices. And then the third one is your child getting sick from coronavirus. So parents are actually worried about teachers and staff getting sick more than their own child or someone else in their family getting sick. So
those are pretty high numbers, though. I mean,
they're all very high numbers.
This is not like, you're talking about 79 and 49. These are, there's a lot of concern there.
There is.
And it's not like a concern you can go, oh, we can mitigate that. I mean, this is gut level stuff, right?
Absolutely.
It's not like you're told. This is a disease that has killed a lot of people.
And if we look here, breaking down parents of color versus white parents, 90%, 92% are concerned about teachers and staff, 91% about their children, 90% about they or someone else in their family getting sick. Whereas with white parents, it's 69% worried about teachers and staff, and 53% and 55% worried about someone in their family getting sick. The
demographic break on this is extraordinary, and I think it's just a matter of time, frankly, before the Trump campaign goes, you know what, it's probably better that we, be as accommodating to parents and teachers as possible, and we'll get through this, and hopefully we'll get a vaccine soon. Otherwise, they're going to get clobbered on this. This, if you show me this and I'm a candidate, I'm going, I know which way I'm going. You go where the votes are.
Well, and I think it's also, we're seeing some messaging coming out that kind of people rolling their eyes at teachers being very concerned about getting sick if they go back. But I think this shows that parents are also very concerned about that. So that messaging coming from teachers unions is actually striking a chord.
Well, it's not just striking a chord. It's an easy chord to strike. I mean, if you're a teacher, say you're my age, you're mid-50s, you've been teaching for 30 years, you're close to retirement, you're going, I have to go back to school, and I'm already retirement age, when this can probably wait, until we get a vaccine or it's a lot more settled. Mm-hmm. I'm going to side with the teachers on this because I've been a teacher, right? It's great for the kids. The kids don't get sick. Well, the teachers are also there in the schoolroom too, and they shouldn't be seen as, being tossed under the bus, if you will, or to catch a disease. And there's a way to mitigate this. You can still have teachers directing students, student assistants, recent college graduates are healthier and set up a hybrid pod system. But this binary choice of go or don't go is a loser for Republicans. There's no upside here. None. The votes you have are the votes you have. You're not going to lose them. If you're trying to get any independents to swing back to you by just being remotely interested in their perspective, this is an obvious one. And and again, I'm not coaching any Republicans, or I don't have any candidates to consult with. But this is pretty cut and dried on where a smart candidate should be addressing these things.
The only caveat to that I would say, and I agree with you to a large extent, is that this is national data. And looking at it state by state, there are going to be some probably significant variations. So you're talking about, a candidate running in Alabama or Tennessee versus a candidate who's running in, Virginia.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, again, we got a question here from one of our registrants, Eric Story. What will it take to get Trump to understand he will drastically improve his approval if he just show an ounce of empathy with people around issue of back to school? Well, I don't think empathy has been a strong point of President Trump's modus operandi, but this is an obvious one. And people are very concerned. They don't want to be forced to go back to work. It's his decision ultimately, Eric, and the fact that he hasn't yet, and he has to see these numbers, show a little bit of empathy to teachers. For the sake of keeping your base together, I don't know what votes you would lose by saying, you know what, we should let the local governments make the call here. But we definitely want to make sure teachers are safe and work out something maybe with, recently graduated college students who can maybe chip away some of their student loan debt in exchange for sitting in on classes for the first semester. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's a solution that people can go, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good idea. Just something. Come up with something.
Nothing. I think the other thing I wanted to point out is that they've also ran these numbers by mothers versus fathers, and mothers are statistically significantly more concerned about each of these factors than fathers are.
Of course they are, and this is an opportunity again. This is the empathy gap, if there is one, for Trump, for women. I mean, it staggers the mind, but he is who he is. He's going to do what he's going to do, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't change his mind here and shift when these numbers come up. So.
Well, now here's the flip side of this. So if they're worried about, their biggest worry is about if kids do not go back to school. The number 1 and 2 is that their child falling behind socially or emotionally and academically. Those are really the top 2 drivers. And it's interesting that the social and emotional well-being of their kids is just as important as the academic concern.
Exactly, and this is mitigatable. There is a path forward on this. Having been a teacher and done a lot of education policy in my day, you can send the kids to school. You just don't have to send the teachers there. I mean, they're going to have internet there. They can learn there. and have someone managing the school population while they're there, volunteers, healthy young people, just don't put the teachers at risk.
And
teachers are people too.
Not sending their kids to school, the main thing that I want to point out here is their child not having enough to eat at home and their child not having access to the tech that they need for online learning,
right.
School and internet. The difference between parents of color and white parents is just huge. These are also the only two elements where mothers are much more concerned than fathers are in a statistically significant piece. And the Kaiser researchers said that a lot of that is probably coming from the fact that mothers were more likely to report being in households that earn less than $40,000 a year. So
they're poor. They're white people are more married. Asian people are much more married with two parents in the home that can provide that care for the kids. I mean, you have 70% of African American children in this country live in a home without a father. Of course they're going to be more concerned. Of course they're going to be more stressed. Of course they're going to have less to eat and less access to technology. I mean, this isn't rocket science. This is just math. It's unbelievable.
So I think the last thing to point out is just this: losing income if you're unable to work outside the home is a tertiary concern to parents. The economic impact of this is not really the way to go if you're going to advise messaging, and a candidate definitely wants to be, on this side of this equation. And so you really want to talk about kids falling behind emotionally, socially, academically, and that's really what you would want to focus on, as opposed to the economic kind of impact of kids staying home.
Well, again, you got to do better than worry about it, because it doesn't mitigate safety of parents and grandparents, people around them. I mean, yeah, you're concerned about it, but when everything is set up in a binary platform in politics, you have to make a choice. And the choice is, do you risk health or emotional and social development that you can't get back your health if you die, right? And there's just that, you prioritize real quickly when it comes to personal health and living versus, delaying social and emotional development, which I'm not saying is a small concern by any stretch of the imagination. But any campaign worth their salt has to come up with some creative alternatives to mitigate these obvious downsides.
So that's what we have on schools reopening. The last thing that I wanted to showcase here is just kind of update our national trend for anti-incumbency. We had a bunch of incumbents lose last week. Specifically, we had a Republican congressman in Kansas, a Democrat congressman in Missouri. Now Watkins lost. There were some legal issues that he was running into, which kind of was the main force of his loss. Whereas Clay on the Democrat side lost because he was not progressive enough. That was very clearly the issue that took him down.
Well, how about that Tennessee U.S. Senate race, Democrat nomination? The candidate who won, far more progressive than the quote-unquote establishment. The establishment guy raised over $2 million. The winner raised $8,000.
Yep, and hadn't even filed a second quarter report. So I'm sure there's some issues going on in that campaign. So Democrats. Chuck Schumer had a rough night last week. They were hoping for Kobach to win the Kansas Senate primary. And they're hoping for their establishment candidate to win in Tennessee, although Tennessee was going to be a long shot anyway, but this made his job a little bit harder.
Well, they might have won anyway, but if they can make it close, they can take money away from other states. And that's the game inside the game that a lot of political observers don't see, is that there's a finite level of money, contrary to what you might see in some of these finance reports. There's only but so much. And you have to be able to spend it wisely at the appropriate time to get the result you need. It doesn't do you any good to raise a lot of money in the last weekend, right? No. You got to be raising money now to start getting the narrative push, the bio pieces going. Do your oppo research and find out what's the counter narrative you have to run against your opponent. It's not right.
Data work.
What's that?
And your polling and data work too. Earlier.
Well, your polling and modeling, you got to get your modeling right. I mean, people are, we've talked about this, how polling works. Pew has an interesting article out on it. Been out for a while, and I just sent it out to our list. Polling is polling. I mean, it's data, but the key is who are you modeling, and what's the model of each poll? That's the nugget, right?
Yep. And that's the predictive analytics piece. It's definitely has always been much more of a national or even statewide campaign focus, but it's getting a little bit cheaper and easier for congressional campaigns to use, especially as more campaign staff are used to dealing with data. We can talk about that more next time.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do predictive analytics next time. That's like your secret sauce there at WPA Intel, right?
It is.
Right.
So yeah, we'll dig into it soon.
I don't think we have any more questions. I'll look around here on the various social media sites. I think we're good. Anything else from you, Amanda?
No. Actually, the only thing I did want to mention is that New York, we had 2 Democrats that lost as of 2 weeks ago. Just want to point out that they're still counting votes from June.
What?
And yeah, something that we might want to look into next time also is the impact.
Because I know mail-in balloting is going to be a very hot topic,
Yep.
very controversial. The last thing you want, I think, the post office is not the one you go to secure the election. So let's do that next time.
Yep.
And then we'll probably have to get some updated numbers on Kamala Harris.
Perfect. It's a plan.
Okay. Have a great week.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate your time.